Black power, Palante, power to all the people, on the move, free the land. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Jarastafari, Hotep. Assalamu alaikum. Bendición. Oboro Obo Boshishe. I like to greet the universal family in peace and prosperity. And tonight, I bring to you a very interesting brother. A brother who's very knowledgeable from what I see of the traditions of Ifa. His name is Brother Joseph Baba Ifa. He is a Babalao. He is a child of Oshun. And so tonight I bring to you this brother, and we are going to discuss a series of things about the traditions of Lukami that many people call Santeria, which is a generic term, which is not an accurate name for the traditions. Regla de Ocha, Lukami, Regla de Ifa. And we're going to talk about that among some other things, such as the beliefs, etc. So, brother, the floor is yours. Could you tell us a little bit about who you are, your credentials, etc.?
Absolutely. Malik, first and foremost, thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to thank Enter the Crisis as well, and, commend you on all the things you're doing and, the awareness and the culture. Sincerely appreciate it from all of us, right? My name is Joseph Oliva. In Ifa, my name is Ifanike. I'm known as Awoni Orumila Irete Otura, Sekangola or Irete Sukankola. I am the owner, operator, one of the owner and operators of and chairman of Botanica Candles and More, Incorporated here in Orlando, Florida. And I have been initiated formally as a Babalawo 4.5 years ago, as an Orisha of Oshun 5.5 years ago, and have been studying Ifa now for 17 years, since the age of 11. So a little bit about me. I can say that I'm from Orlando, Florida. I was born in Miami, Florida, raised in the areas of Opa-locka and Hialeah, and ultimately came up here where I was able to further myself in the culture. I was initiated in Cuba for my consecrations in Orisha as well as Ifa, and am somebody that basically dedicates their life to the study of these traditions, as you call them, and profounding myself in the wisdom that is Ifa and Orisha.
Now, were you raised in the traditions? Was your family in the traditions, or did you, I don't know if you want to use the word revert or convert?
So, yeah. How do I put this? I am Cuban, amongst other things. I'm also Puerto Rican. You know, on my father's side of the family, I'm Italian, as well as a bunch of Eastern European ethnicities. But I'm from a place called Hialeah, right? And you know, when we talk about Hialeah, Florida, we're talking about a place where this culture is so alive, and I would say, you know, is the mecca of Orisha culture, probably within the United States. You know, you have really hotspots like New York, Orlando. We're building it up now, different places. But when we're talking about this area, it's very rare to find somebody who isn't at least aware of the culture here. Can I say that I come from a religious family as far as Ifa and Orisha? I can't necessarily say that. I was raised Catholic, but like most children in that area, or from a Cuban family from that area, or Cuban in general, we go to church during the day, and at night we do a bunch of Ifa stuff, right? So I was the first one, along with my mother, to formally initiate in Ifa and Orisha. My mother has crown Shango. As far as from like an esoteric mysticism type thing, I am aware of the fact that my great-grandmother was an espiritista from Spain. I understand that I do have some African descendancy on my great-grandfather's side, all of this being, you know, maternal grandmother lineage, right? But I can't say that I was raised in an Ifa household, but I can say that there was always a San Lázaro, there was always a Santa Barbara, there was always a pumpkin in front of Oshun. So the culture was definitely alive, but nothing I can say formal as far as initiation.
So what gravitated you towards the tradition, being that you were raised Catholic? Like, what was it that you said, you know what, like, I wanna go this path?
Well, I mean, there's always this defining moment, and for me, the defining moment I'll never forget. I was in my my aunt Teresa's house in Hialeah, and we went to visit her, and she had a beautiful Caridad de Cobre, Our Lady of Charity, right? Who actually, you know, I later found out was Oshun, who was my guardian Orisha, and I never forget. They were placing a pumpkin in front of her. They were covering her with honey and sprinkles. And I just found that really interesting, and even more interesting than what I would see in church. And, you know, I just said to myself, I'd really like to learn more about that. And, you know, we had this cement head thing behind the door, which was an elegua. And, you know, it's just things that, you know, the older generation really didn't talk about, but it was made very apparent. So I said, I got to delve deeper into that. So it was a calling from a very young age. A lot of people have asked me this question in the past because I don't necessarily fit the criteria of the conventional babalawo, or the you know, that which is popular, and it was just a calling. I'd go even farther to say is destiny, because it was just something I really can't explain. I just liked it, like most things.
So you come to the traditions. Of course, you made Ocha.
Yes, sir.
You crowned Oshun, um, and then eventually you go towards Ifa.
Yes, sir.
Um, for the listeners out there, can you explain what a Ocha house is, or what is a Ocha house as well as what is Ocha?
Absolutely. So to be able to answer that, I have to go a little further back. So we're going to touch on what the religion is in general, the actual formal name of this spirituality, and it's Ifa, right? When we're talking about anything that has to do with Orisha or anything that has to do with Orumila, Babalawos, etc., we're talking about Ifa. Ifa is the umbrella term. Ifa is the whole spirituality. Now, within Ifa, within this corpus, within this poetic literary compendium, you find an aspect of it which is known as Orisha. Now, mind you, Orumila is an Orisha, but he is manifested and practiced in a different format where he really only interacts with his sons, the Babalawos, as opposed to other Orishas that you can be initiated into, such as Shango, Ochung, etc., where the Olorisha and the Abore Orisha, more formally known as the Oriade, functions. So within Ifa, you have an aspect known as Orisha, which is practiced most heavily by Olorishas, right? As opposed to the aspect of Ifa, which is basically dedicated to Orumila, where we, the Babalawos, basically dedicate ourselves to and, occupy ourselves with the most. So to get to what an Ocha house is, there's multiple definitions of that now because things have changed within recent times. Technically, every house is an Osha house by definition and by ethic. But when we're talking about what you may be referring to, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is the Orisha house that exists nowadays that does not involve the service of the Babalawo. Is that what we're referring to?
Yes.
So, when we talk about this topic, it can be a little polemic, but I will say this: if a lot of people like to say, "Well, my house is Orisha and we don't utilize the Babalawo," and I understand where that comes from. That comes from a time when the Babalawos weren't readily accessible by the Olorisha. The Babalawos were some of the last slaves to be brought over, right? Due to the fact that, for whatever reason, either they hid a certain way or they were, protected a certain way. They were one of the last ones to actually come over in the diaspora. So in this time, we had a bunch of really talented elders who were Olorisha that wanted to continue the faith but didn't have the proper means to be able to do so. So that's where you see the Abore begin, or the Oriate begin to use the shells to determine the Orisha Alabatori, or the guardian Orisha, as well as, certain functions that were very Babalawo-centric being occupied by our brother Oriates, right? And definitely commend them for basically helping survive a religion that, was lost in a new world, right? Is that necessarily a necessity nowadays? No, because we have multitudes of Babalawos and initiated men that are, competent and prepared to be able to fulfill those roles. So that's where you see that basically the futility of the Olorisha house, being that the Babalawo is accessible now. I can't imagine any ethical reason why we would eliminate the Babalawo from a fully functioning Orisha house.
Now, could you explain, like, if someone says I'm in an Ifa house?
Okay, so I mean, technically everybody's in an Ifa house, right?
Yeah.
But it's one where you're basically first steps within the faith, and we're talking about Afro-Cuban tradition, of course, to begin with. It's basically where the Babalawo is going to be the one who's kind of direct you through these first couple steps. What are those first steps? Everything starts with Orumila, right? It starts with the Isefa, Ikofafung, or Owofagang, which is basically the hand of Ifa, depending on gender. Ikofa is for women, Owofagang, or Awofaka, as it's popularly known, is for men, right? And the reason that these are the first steps in this faith is because Orumila is the revealer of destiny, right? He's Eleri Ping, or the witness to destiny. So the first steps in the religion are to find out who you are or what you chose in heaven. And that's done by Orumila's priest, because Orumila was the one who was able to basically write down that information in the form of an Odu. And we, as his priest, basically manifest that information through the oracle of Ifa, right? So if you're in an Ifa house, you're going to receive your warriors and your hand of Ifa simultaneously in something known as the plante. And at that point, once you have that information, we can kind of identify what your path is within this religion, whether it's meant to be an Olorisha. And at that point, either you arrived at your Ifa house by way of an Olorisha, or your Baba Ifa is going to put you in contact with some people he trusts and he knows to be competent to be able to help you initiate yourself in Orisha. Because in the New World, the Babalawo does not perform this function, right? He seated it in the Odu of Osalafobeo. So, or you could be a gentleman that is meant to become a babalawo. And at that point, we're going to start grooming you as your babas to be able to get you to that step, right, in that moment. Or you could be somebody who's meant to be a tata inkisi or a yaya inkisi or a palero. So we can put you in contact with somebody to fulfill that. Orumila is the first step, and that may be the last formal step that you do within this religion, but that doesn't take away the spiritual debts that you have with Orula. Let's say you're meant to be an Oriate. Well, you're still meant to consult yourself with Ifa once a year. You're still meant to perform a Bo based on your Odu of Ifa or your hand of Ifa. And, you know, as long as you fulfill with Orumila and you attend your things, you know, that may be your interaction with Orumila up until that point. Love him, honor him, and, you know, continue with the great profession that is that of the Oriate. So, you know, that's what an Ifa house kind of looks like, you know.
For those that's listening, in case they don't know what Ebo is, can you explain what Ebo is?
Absolutely. I actually just came out with a video on this on my channel, Joseph Baba Ifa. And to put it in a nutshell, the word Ebo means sacrifice, or I sacrifice, right? And there's multiple forms of Ebo. But when we're talking about the Ebo performed by the Babalawo, we're talking about the Ebo Opon Fa. And the word Ebo means sacrifice. The word Opon means tablet or tray. And Fa is a contracted word of or version of the word Ifa. So we're talking about the sacrifice on the tray of Ifa, where the Babalawo basically begins invoking certain odus or signs of Ifa and verses to be able to cleanse the person's ori, which is the destiny right here, to be able to help that person align themselves more, to be able to basically progress more. Because every time we do a verse of Ifa, we're going to touch this yellow powder called ierosum to your forehead, and this basically cleanses this chakra or ori or whatever you want to refer to it as, so that this can help guide you through life and help you align yourself with nature and your ambiance so that you can progress more easily, right? So let's say you're meant to win the lotto. At the end of the day, there is no Ebo to win the lotto, but if it is your destiny, how does Ebo help with that? Well, some people will say, hey, I'm meant to win the lotto, so I don't have to do anything to get the lotto. And that's true. But instead of maybe winning it at 70 years old, if we do Ebo, we might win it at 30, right? And, you know, obviously, presumably more time on earth, more time to really enjoy life and enjoy those blessings of prosperity. And it's not always necessarily money. It could be health. It could be stability. It can be any of these things. Ifa wants you to enjoy your destiny sooner. And that's what Ebo does. It brings things sooner.
Can you touch on the difference between traditional and Afro-Cuban?
Okay, so there's going to be multiple differences. And the reason being for this is Ifa never contradicts itself. It's simply manifested differently over generations of different reincarnations, right? So to say that the traditional Isese practice is different from the Lukumi Afro-Cuban practice is to say that Isese itself is practiced differently in every city-state of Nigeria. So what do I mean by that? Well, you're going to hear about a taboo where, let's say, Oshun shouldn't be offered snails. And this is, you know, present within traditional concepts as well. You know, if I recall correctly, in Ibadan, they actually do offer the snail to Oshun. In other areas, they do not. Or you're going to hear that, you know, in certain places, there's certain things that they don't offer to a gungung. I recently spoke with a priest who said, you know, it's a taboo to offer duck or red palm oil to the Isang Egungun icon. And mind you, I'm affiliated with people who don't see Egungun having any taboos. So, you know, for there not to be any differences between Africa and Cuba, that's impossible, because in Africa itself, they have a lot of, you know, differentiating views on that. Now, the big issue we may be experiencing sometimes is a lot of people like to say, well, in Cuba, they do different things differently than Africa, so it might not be authentic. And that's, you know, that's simply incoherent, because in Africa, they don't all do things the same way, but they don't discredit each other. So that's kind of the climate we're dealing with religiously, and we have to overcome as a community, because there's a lot of things we, the Afro-Cuban Babalawo and Orisha, could, help our traditional brothers learn, and vice versa, obviously. We have to realize that we're nothing more than displaced slaves, people that were ripped from their homeland and separated. The day that we look each other as family rather than competition is when, forgive me, is when these traditions and we as a community are really going to grow. And that's what we're really working towards here at Botanica Candles and More.
Can you explain Pataki and Odu?
Pataki, and what was the other word? Forgive me.
Odu.
Okay. So when we're talking about the word Odu, it has a couple different translations, right? The word Odu means year, first and foremost. It's a reference of time. And this is a really interesting concept, because the Yorubas have a beautiful language, and they'll utilize one term to manifest different meanings, because they all ultimately have a lot to do with each other, right? When we're talking about the word Odu, it means a time frame, first and foremost. But when we also look at another meaning, it also means a sign of Ifa, or a stanza of Ifa, a combination, or an Odu of Ifa. And it's interesting because each Odu of Ifa represents an incarnation of Orula, or a year, right? In the divine world, a year represents eternity. That's why Olodumare is known as he who is the owner of time's infinite, because he's the owner of Odu, or time, right? When we're also talking about the word Odu, we're also talking about a deity that manifests itself through the signs of Ifa, right? It's actually a deity, right? So those are a couple of the different ways to translate that. Now, when we talk about Pataki, it's a term that's mostly used within the Afro-Cuban tradition to reference a verse of Ifa, or a story of Ifa. In the traditional practice, you're going to hear the term Esefa, right? You might even hear the word Itang, right? Ese means foot, and Ifa means Ifa. It means a foot of Ifa, or a path of Ifa. That's where you hear the word camino so heavily used in the Afro-Cuban tradition, because it actually comes from that phrase, right? One way of interpreting it. And then you have Itang, and the word Itang means history, right? So each verse of Ifa is a historical account of what Orumila went through. So that's where you're going to see the difference. So Patakis are within Odus, right? The Odu is composed of Patakis, or stories that they actually lived on Earth. It's their own historical account.
Are you permitted to discuss the beautiful Seperos, the beautiful Orishas in back of you? Are you allowed to speak on that, or no?
Yeah, of course. Definitely, we're always going to provide as much information as we ethically can, right? So behind me, if I can see him correctly, he's right over my head, is my personal Ifa. Here at Botanica Candles and More, being that we're functioning quite frequently, I came to a point where I said I need to have my deities here to be able to, make things convenient for my godchildren and clients and whatnot. So we brought everybody here. And behind me is my personal Ifa, and then the ones to the sides are my Orishas. To the side of Orumila, you're going to have Obadala and the white Sopera, my personal Oshun, my guardian Orisha, and the yellow one that looks like the trophy. Agayu is over there, at least from what I'm seeing, to the left, possibly, with the multicolored cloth. And then you see a little bit of Yemaya, right? My wife designed the throne, and red and white is our Botanica colors. And we kind of wanted it to still have that authenticity. So we put the leopard skin up there to kind of represent our traditional roots and who we are, right?
That's very beautiful.
Appreciate it.
Okay, and I know you did a video recently, and could you, and I would like to ask if you could please, for especially those, the not initiated, they may pick up some books, they may watch some YouTube videos, and they come across and they'll say, all right, you got Odolamare, you got Alofi, you have Arumila. Can you explain the concept of who they are, and the concept of creator in Ifa?
Absolutely. A lot of names, and I can see where someone could easily get caught up in all of this different, terminology. So we're going to start with who was there at the beginning, right? We have Olodumare, right? We translated his name. It means he who is owner of the times infinite or the times that have not manifested, right? He was there at the beginning. So Olodumare's voice is Ifa. The actual oracle of Ifa, the verses of Ifa are known as the voice of Olodumare. So what role does Orunmila play in all this? Orunmila is the perfect manipulator of the Ifa oracle, right? So Orunmila is nothing more than the translator of Olodumare to the human people by interpreting Ifa to them. So we can really get those divine messages to make life better, right? On earth, the extension of Olodumare is Ori, or our personal life force, which occupies right here on the forehead, right? So Orunmila is basically the revealer of Ori, and because of this, the revealer of destiny, because our destiny seats itself in our head. So how does this whole process kind of work? When we're talking about what happens before we're born, the first thing that happens is a gentleman named Odudua, and in company of Ogun, begin constructing the body. Some people say out of iron, some people say it's a mixture of clay, what have you. But you have your body from the neck down, right? This can be, encountered in the Odu Obeyonu, and a portion of the Odu Obedi is also at play here when we're talking about the selection of destiny. So as a headless body, they throw you, or they thrust you into the house of a manifestation of Obadala known as Ijala, right? Or Ajala, depending on how you say it. So when you enter the house of Ayala, it's basically millions of heads that he constructs. Ayala is known as the constructor of heads. So they thrust you into this house so that you can picture destiny blindly, so that they keep it fair. That way you can't choose the best one or the one you think you may want, right? So once you blindly select a head, you put it on your shoulders, and at that point, you're knelt in front of Olodumare. This is, manifested in Obedi. And Olodumare basically says, hey, what do you want to be on earth? And let's say you tell him, I want to be a Babalawo, And Olodumare says yes to whatever we want to do, right? He's that kind and that merciful. So at that moment, he starts saying, well, for you to be able to become a Babalao, you have to go through these hardships and accomplish these things and do these different sacrifices to fulfill your destiny. We can't just make it easy for you, right? So at that moment, he asks, or Ori elects, the Orisha that's going to help you do this. Because the word Orisha means he who defends Ori, or defends the destiny, and ultimately is the one who helps you get there. So let's say Odudua is like, I'll do it, I'll help him, right? And then Olodumare looks at all the ancestors and Egungs, and he's like, who else is going to help, spiritually wise? And let's say the Congo and, the medicine man and the Indian, the Native American are like, we'll make part of his spiritual court. So at that moment, they all kind of look at Orula, and they all say, well, what sign are we going to give him? And let's say Orula says, why don't we go ahead and give him Otrubo Meji, right? And everybody kind of says yes to it. And then at that point, Olodumare looks at Orula and says, you have everything written down? And he's like, yeah, I got this. So at that moment, Olodumare looks at you and says, see you next time. At that moment, you're born, right? And when you enter the world, a couple things happen. First, you forget everything that you asked for in heaven, because your mother's amniotic fluid is known as Omi Babbe, which is known as the water of forgetfulness. At that moment, the doctor smacks you on the hiney, and you start crying, because one, you come into earth and they're already mistreating you, and two, you just got kicked out of paradise. So what happens at that point is, depending on gender, for girls 7 days old, for gentlemen 9 days old, they give you the Esentaye Loruko, right? Or Iko Sedaye, which is basically Esentaye Loruko means I put my feet on earth and I'm given a name. And they reveal your destiny through the hand of Ifa, which is your Odu of Ifa, which is who you are. So these are all the different roles that these, energies are playing at the beginning. And ultimately, Odudua constructs the body to a certain degree. Olodumare breathes the life force known as Emi into the body, and then Orunmila is the one who tells you what you asked for. That's why Orula is the first step within this faith, because if we don't have Ori and that spiritual energy that comes down in the form of an Odu penetrate our brain, we're not living in harmony with the nature that surrounds us.
So Um, and for those that's in the room, I'm going to get to your questions. Just please bear with me. Um, and I just want to reply to a comment in the room. Somebody named Straight from the Kettle says, this thing ain't a joke for views on YouTube, A. Uh, as I said to you, myself and my guest, we are not joking. So I don't know if you think we're joking around or what the case may be, but just to inform you, this is a video to inform particularly those that are not initiated in these illustrious traditions, about the traditions, for those that may be interested in pursuing the traditions, or to those that just want to be informed. So that is the point of the tradition, or the point of the video for these traditions that we're speaking about. And I will get to your questions. Um, if you could, so would you say that in the traditions, um, would you say that being that you mentioned some may come from the perspective of saying that they are one of monotheism. For example, let's just say a Muslim, they believe in Allah, He's alone, He has no sons, He has no daughter, He has no Trinity. You know, there's nothing, there's nothing with Him. He's alone. Or like in the Bible says, "Thy Lord, Thy God of Israel is one, and besides me is none." Um, would you elaborate on um, that these? Would you say these traditions are indeed monotheistic, or mm, maybe not monotheistic, but the view of the Creator? Would you say we believe in absolutely believe in one? And would you say that um, the Creator dwells in all of creation? Um, would you say that there's also an aspect of anthropomorphism
Well,
in the tradition?
absolutely. I can say that Ifa is extremely polytheistic.
Mhm.
And the reason I say that is because we're talking about, very old world traditions. When we talk about Ifa, Ifa is one of the oldest spiritualities that exists. We're talking about, things such as Judaism, Hinduism, Shinto. Ifa is, one of those 5,000-year-old or older faiths, right? Now, what occurred was when Santeria really came to the forefront of culture, and it being so associated with the Catholic Church and the idea of saints and things like that. Originally, a lot of anthropologists, the first thing they said was this is a monotheistic faith, right? But as we delve into the mythology of Ifa and scripture, it's very easy to see that we are polytheistic to a certain degree. Olodumare is our supreme being, right? He is from which life emanates. He is our everything, right? We do believe in one God, and I do believe this God is Allah. It's the same as Yahweh, God Almighty, depending Brahmin, whatever you refer to. But the Orishas are the extensions, the literal extensions of Olodumare, and the reason I say that is because the Orishas are nothing more than frequencies of light. When we analyze Odus such as Baba Yobe or Baba Oturameji, it speaks of Olorum, right? Which is, the manifestation of God as the sun. Olorum means owner of the sky. And it speaks of when the Irumole, or the energies of light, emanated from Olodumare and descended upon earth, right? So literally the Orishas are nothing more than the extensions of Olodumare. So therefore they are gods. It's a little bit different than the concept of maybe Catholicism, where you have a God and then you have, saints, right? People who are recognized either for being martyrs or being, exemplary, examples of spirituality. The Orishas were actually human manifestations of divinity on earth, right? And the reason you even see certain characteristics with certain Orishas or why they occupied certain bodies, it's really dependent on the frequency of light that they occupied. For example, if we look at Oshun, right, you see that she's associated with the color yellow. She has to do with the river, honey, femininity. Well, her frequency of light basically lent itself to be associated with those things. When we look at the color yellow, as you pass it through a prism, the color yellow is a feminine in nature. It's receiving, it's soft, it's loving, it's all these different things. And let's say we oppose it to the color red, which is associated with Shango, who's a very viral, masculine, somewhat aggressive energy with lightning and thunder. Well, that kind of resembles the color red, right? We're talking about a high frequency of light. So that's what I really base it off of. If the Orishas are nothing more than frequency of light that basically entered human bodies and manifested it through those, incarnations, I have to say that we're very polytheistic because they're nothing more than the extensions of the sun or of Olodumare, right? So we are very polytheistic with monotheistic undertones, I guess we could say, because we do believe as Olodumare as our one life force, but there are other gods per se. It's a complicated topic, but I definitely say we're much more polytheistic than monotheistic, if at all.
Now, I know you briefly touched on Orishas, saying that they're basically the manifestation of Odolamare,
Yes, sir.
and incarnated into humans. It's interesting because I've heard other people, some people they will disagree with that. I personally agree with the fact that they were incarnated in humans. Can you elaborate more on Orisha? For example, would you say that they are ancestors? Would you say that they are spirits? Would you say that they are forces of nature? Can you touch on that?
I would say they're all of that. And the reason being is when we talk about the Irumole or the spirits of light occupied heaven before they occupied earth, right? So each of them was given a destiny. Let's talk about maybe Odudua, right? So Odudua in heaven was an Irumole or a spirit of light or a manifestation of Olodumare. So he was given a destiny because divination is done before you leave heaven. And this man was destined to be our Messiah, right? He was destined to lead us out of the dark ages into the greatness of the Yoruba kingdom, right? Or those great periods in antiquity. So basically, he descended with this destiny into a human body that was actually born. And what happened is being that this destiny or was already, prophesized before he arrived, he lived out this amazing life on earth, basically deeming him worthy of being venerated after death. Because to become an Orisha, you have to live, be born, and ultimately transition or pass away. And the word Orisha is deified ancestor. When we look at the Odu Irete Egutan or Irete Ogunda, it says Ikulo Biosha. A lot of people like to translate this as the spirits come before the Orisha, or Egun comes before the Orisha. I like to delve in a little more and say that for one to become a deity or an Orisha, one must die, right? So when we look at Odudua, who based on scripture was the first Orisha or the first person to really fulfill that for the Yoruba nation, he basically did that. This gentleman, he fulfilled all the roles that his people needed at that moment. He lived a very long life. He left ancestors and heirs, and descendants, better said. And then he ultimately passed away because these energies, it's like physics says and chemistry says, energy is neither born nor destroyed. It's recycled. So when we house light inside a human body, it must perish so that energy can go back to basically that source element, which is Olodumare. So to go to your question, they're all of these things, right? Because if you're a frequency of light, you're associated with certain parts of nature. If you're a frequency of light, you must be a part of a human body and you must transition, thus making you a glorified ancestor, which is what the Orisha is. So I would say they're all of those things, Malik.
Okay. Look, I don't know who this person is straight from the kettle. I've already stated that I'm going to get to your questions, and I don't know if you're trying to attack the brother. I hope you're not. You know, the person is asking questions like, um, first of all, the person's asking, who initiated you to be a Babalao? Who is your spiritual father? Uh, did he go through the moaning process to become a Baba? Who is his spiritual father or mother? Who birthed, initiated him into the Orishas? He did pay, he did, I guess he's saying he did not pay homage to them before he started the live. That's a no-no, red flag. And now they're saying, okay, thanks, boss. No, and listen, I'm not your boss, okay? And maybe you read to refer back to my first video that I've ever done. This is a channel that we don't do drama over here. So either you're gonna ask questions with sincerity, or if you want to be excuse my language, if you want to be an asshole, I'm the king of assholes. Okay, so this is what's gonna happen. Either you're gonna play along with the rules of my channel, or you're gonna be blocked. Okay, and you're gonna be respectful. All right, and that's just how it's gonna be. And I'm gonna get to your questions, and that's the last time I'm saying it. If I see you post anything else, you block. You done. Matter of fact, if any of my moderators in the room, if I tell you to block them, block them. I'm not doing that here. Okay, because um, we're talking about Ifa. So if we're going to talk about Ifa, then we're talking about Iwepele. We're talking about good character. Okay. And to me, you're being condescending. You're not being sincere. You're not being genuine. And that's all I'm going to say. And I am going to take it how I want to because I can read. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to block you, and you, if you can, Jade, get rid of this person. I don't play the games of disrespect. Okay, either you're gonna come on here and you're gonna want to listen and learn. Okay, and if you disagree, you disagree. Okay, this is a serious path which you're part of. I'm glad for you. Okay, and nobody. Okay, all right. I'm gonna just refer to this last thing, and then because I'm about to drop a bomb on you. Let me explain something to you, Mr. Kettle, Mrs. Kettle, or whatever you are. You're not gonna come on my channel, and you're not gonna say that this is watered down, okay? Because when the Africans came to Cuba, the traditions were preserved to the best of the capability of the African until the year 2020. Orula, Orumila is Orumila, whether it's in Cuba, whether it's in Nigeria, whether it's in Detroit. Any of the Orishas or any of the Orishas, wherever they are. And because you want to say watered down because you see Catholic saints, my friends, you don't know if one of your ancestors was in Cuba and had to preserve their life because of a thing called slavery and disguise the Orisha with a Catholic saint. We don't worship Catholic saints. And let me just give you a rundown. When you receive your lakeys, there ain't no Catholic priest, there ain't no Catholic nun, there ain't no Hail Marys, there ain't no Bible. When you receive your Mama de la Rula, to when you receive your warriors, to whether you receive who is your Risha, to you get your Odu, there is nothing in it dealing with Catholicism. Okay? So we in 2020, and since people want to play the game of, oh, this is watered down because you think that whatever you upon is superior to the next, you're missing the whole concept. Okay, because if that's the case, then I guess voodoo is watered down. Voodoo is in Haiti that came from Benin, and they use Catholic saints. So is that watered down? Is that watered down? We're not going to play the game of this anti-Latino, We're not going to play this game of anti-African American or continental African. We don't play that on this channel. Okay, and we're not doing this. And you're not going to come on here because I'm glad you came on here so I can make an example out of you and show you how stupid you are with the comments you're making. And it shows me what you know about your traditions. It shows me what you know about the traditions overall, saying they watered down. To me, I'm going to tell you what that sounds like. By you saying this, we watered down, I'm not going to calm down. By you saying that this is watered down, that shows me that you are indoctrinated with your Abrahamic faith, thinking that I'm superior, thinking you have that Christian Judeo-Islamic mentality of, oh, I'm superior because I follow the Old Testament. No, I'm superior because I follow the New Testament. No, I'm superior because I follow the Quran. These traditions don't do that. We don't play who's superior. We don't knock other traditions because the last time I checked, Orula dwells in all places of worship. The last time I checked, when you're doing that bowl for Orula, it goes to a place of learning, and it goes to a religious institution. So it could be a church, it could be a synagogue, it could be a masjid, it could be a temple, it could be whatever. So you are just a very ignorant person. You really pissed me off. I'm sorry about that. Brother, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's perfectly fine. As far as not to cut off the flow of the interview, we'll go ahead and delve into that just because the information by no means is anybody trying to occult anything, right? And I think it would be a good moment to go ahead and mention who initiated me, because there are people like that out there. So no worries. I was initiated 4.5 years ago in Ifa in Cuba by a gentleman named Pedro Vieira. His name is Ifaomi, and he's Awo Rumila Ogunda Tetura or Ogunda Tasia. My Oyubona is Alberto Gonzalez. He's known as Ifache. Woni Orumila Oshedura, and he radicates in the area of Carauao and Ancestral. As far as Orisha, my godmother, her name is Dulce Olomidara, who's from Centro Havana, as well as my Ojubona, her name is Odalis Ajebu, and she lives in El Pilar and etc. Right? All of these people are alive, and I made a point of that from the very beginning, Malik, to make all of my things, very, very public, right? Because in nowadays day and age, anybody can say they're anything, right? Per se. So I've been very blessed with some very good teachers, right? Like my uncle Barbarito Ireteopa, like my good friend Lazarito Fumbile. And a lot of really great people, even some of the elders of my wife, as far from her Orisha standpoint, and for the information, even for my wife, for those who may have any doubts there, her name is Erika Montañez. She's known as Poroye. She's Olo Chumi Bukole. And, she's been crowned for about 10 years now. And my house is literally riddled with Olorishas, Paleros, etc. So, it's never a dull moment to go ahead and, mention where you come from. When it comes to me, though, I've always been a fan of basing things off of my merit and not being so quick to say necessarily where I come from and whatnot, simply so people can get to recognize me as a person first and as a priest before they start basically knowing what lineage I come from. So that's basically to answer that question.
If you could you touch on what Ifa teaches as far as afterlife?
Oh gosh, that's a beautiful concept. There's a couple different ideas, right? When we perish or when we transition, Ifa says that who comes to find us or who comes to guide us afterwards are a couple different figures. First and foremost is our guardian Orisha, right? There's a couple different Orishas that are present once one actually transitions, because we have the spiritual process and then we have the physical process. From a spiritual standpoint, your guardian Orisha is there. Some Odus say that, Eshu is there. Your ancestors, mom, dad, unfortunately, if they transitioned, those people are there to help guide you, because what they're trying to do now is basically help elevate you back to that supreme force, which is Olodumare, right? From a physical standpoint, as far as the process of, unfortunately, decomposition and things like that, the Odu Irete Laye or Irete Unfa states that Babaluaye is the one who basically is present in the funeral cart and the funeral rites, and he's ultimately the one who takes the cadaver to the cemetery, right? Where Oya is actually present at its gates. And what Oya does is she basically takes that specimen and provides it to Oba and Yewa, who are actually, or Yewa, who are actually present in the grave and perform the decomposition process, right? So those are the two concepts. But after we transition, we're basically taken in front of Olodumare again to be recognized for either positive or negative actions. And depending on how much sacrifice or ebos we provided on earth, to see if we have to go down again to elevate, or if we're lucky enough to basically stay up there in eternal, bliss, and function on a more spiritual level. Because there's different levels to existence. If we're here on earth right now, it's because we still have things to perform here, but there will get a point where we don't have to come down, but we still have tasks to fulfill as spirits. So if you have that spirit guide, he's basically gone to a point of elevation where he doesn't have to reincarnate, but he does have to still help people get to his level, right? And this is, the spiritual escalafón, as it's known in Spanish, or the spiritual ladder in English, right? And that's all we're trying to do, is elevate back to, I guess you could call it Zion, right? Or that one force, or that beginning. And that's what we're trying to do, get back to the light.
So in the traditions, there is no hell, there is no Satan.
By no means. Eshu kind of fulfills that role, but Eshu is not Satan. That's like the new phrase nowadays, right? But all of those things are present right here, my brother. Unfortunately, we're going to go through the worst pains we'll ever go through right here. We're going to go through the happiest moments right here. We're going to be in limbo right here. There's plenty of people, that are basically dead, and they're still breathing. So, it's unfortunate, but all of it's right here. And that's also a promising factor as well. That's why we need to live to the fullest. But talk about, when we're talking about hell and things like that, or, the devil or Lucifer, in the Eastern faiths, the older ones, there's really no concept of this all supreme evil being, right? A lot of people would even go as far to say that this is a concept that was implemented to be able to maintain people, organized, right? To use a term. But Eshu is nothing more than the director of the Ajogun, which are all the negativities that exist in the universe. So in the Odu Oshetura, as well as it's spoken on in Oyaku Meji as well, was where Eshu was identified as the dispenser of Ashe, right? And what does this mean? So Olodumare is so merciful. He wants to constantly give us blessings. But Eshu was like, hold on, I want to tempt human beings to make sure they're really worthy of your Ashe, or blessings. So whenever we're on the path to success, obstacles come up. That's an Oyeku Meji. Or whenever we're about to achieve something great, temptation presents itself. And this is what takes us to our higher being, to avoid these things. And we do this by studying our Odu and recognizing what's going on so we can avoid it. Because we went through it in the past life and we failed. That's why we have an Odu, so we can learn from those stories and not repeat the same mistakes, right? And then that's the positive aspect of it. And if Eshu, you're able to overcome his tests, where he's constantly trying to break your Iwapele, like you mentioned, or your good character, you get blessed. And then there's the other aspect, where if you fail, he directs the Ajogun, or the negativities, towards you. Because Eshu is one of the 401 Irumole, but he is the head of the 201 Ajogun. So this is when we fail, we receive things such as Iku, which is either death or lack of function, Arun, which is sickness or destruction of our environment, or Ofo, which is loss or unmeasured giving, right? And from these three negativities, we can basically create any other negativity in the universe, just like the three top Ides, which are Ariku, which means longevity or to not see death, Oma, which is intelligence, and Owo, which is economic prosperity. If we're able to have these three things, we're going to lead a wonderful life, because we want to have the life to enjoy our prosperity and the intelligence to be able to use it constructively. So these are the concepts that the Yorubas had 5,000 years ago.
Would you care to give the listeners red flags for the charlatans out there that play with these traditions, that like to scam people? Could you give people like red flags, like if they were, wanting to come into these traditions? What would be the red flags to look for?
Absolutely. Great question. I definitely recommend them to my video, How to Choose Godparents, on Joseph Baba Ifa YouTube channel. Red flags for me, be careful when, and I always say we cannot allow religious thought to hinder our common sense, right? Common sense and logic is something that should never be sacrificed for religion, in my opinion. Now, faith, I'm not saying don't have faith. Faith is important, and that's something that is logical, in my opinion. But things you want to be careful of, or, in my opinion, very commonsensical things. Be careful with anybody who's trying to rush you, right? Things that are crucial in life should never be rushed, whether it be relationships of any sort or definitely spirituality. These are things that take time. They have to be planted, watered, and grown, right? You want to make sure the person is respecting your time, right? If we have an appointment at said date, make sure there's accountability, especially if you've already invested economically in somebody. And that's another big key point there. Everything is not money. This is, to a certain degree, depending on how you analyze it, Ifa does have a economic aspect to it, like all faiths do, right? But it should not be the determining factor of whether we're going to help somebody or not. If you've invested and you've initiated yourself with somebody and you've already taken these steps, hey, Padrino, I don't have it right now. I have this emergency. What can we do? There should be some accountability there, because the Babalawo is kind of like the doctor, not from an allopathic standpoint, but from an accountability standpoint. If I have a patient or a client or a godchild that needs me at 2 a.m. and it's that serious, hey, believe me, I got my slippers on and we're heading out the door and we're doing what has to be done. But, unfortunately, not everybody looks at it that way. The Babalawo, the modern Orisha, has a clock, right? So, it depends. It really depends. But these are things you want to be careful with. You want to make sure they're accountable. You want to make sure they're allocating your funds correctly. You want to make sure they're teaching you as much as you can be taught. If they really have an interest in your progress, they're going to educate you. They're going to mold you. They're going to guide you. So if they're not providing any of these things from the very beginning, you can't expect things to, change once you're married, right? You can't expect things to change once you take those next steps. So these are things, or at least signs of things, we need to see from the very beginning, so it's a long-lasting religious relationship.
Do you think that there's too many individuals that are making OCHA to those that are receiving the FODs and those that are being scratched today? Do you think that it's being done quite in abundance, like in the sense of the traditions are for people that need help, right?
Well, there's a couple different ways to answer that, right? I'm not so much alarmed by the abundance necessarily, because you have people who need assistance, and then you have people who have vocation, and you have people who simply want to fulfill. The aspect, and me being an owner of a Botanica, we see multiple things on a daily basis, different types of scenarios. I simply wish there was more of a tutelage aspect to things, so people knew what they were actually getting into. And on the same token, more of a development of a relationship between the elders and the initiate before they take those steps, because these are things that are beyond eternal. Your godfather in this life could very well be the one in the next life, right? So we have to make sure we at least get along, right? So I would say that, as far as abundance, I understand a lot of people are interested in this, and this is a beautiful renaissance period for Ifa as well. But we really have to know who we're initiating, what are their intentions, and are we ready to uphold that responsibility as elders? And vice versa, as the initiate, is that person willing to fulfill me? Am I willing to fulfill my obligations to them? These are the things I'd like to see a little bit more of a dialogue and a communication. And when we talk about initiation technically isn't the solution to one's problems, right? It's a great help. It's a fulfillment. This is a vocation. This is a fulfillment, right? But if we're talking about someone comes in and they're really not interested in Ifa and they have said issue, well, let's not force things upon them either. Let's consult them. Let's perform a bowl for them and allow them to build that faith and possibly get initiated. Like, Malik, I have clients that I've been consulting now literally since I got initiated, and they don't necessarily have the vocation to become practitioners, and that's okay. You know, there are people that fulfill their spiritual needs and they continue with their life, and that has to be respected as well. I'd rather that than somebody who gets rushed into initiation and then, you know, there's this lack of accountability and then they ultimately denounce Ifa. So I'd rather somebody not get initiated than denounce.
So you have a Botanica.
Yes, sir.
And what's the name again?
Botanica Candles and More in Orlando, Florida.
Okay. And how long you've had the Botanica?
We're about to be coming up on 2 years in November.
So what got you into opening the Botanica and what's it like? You know, do you suggest that others, if they're able to financially, to open a Botanica?
At the end of the day, whatever propagates Ifa across the world, I support, right? As long as it's done ethically. I will say it's not a business for the faint of heart. I have to interact with things and, situations that most business owners don't, right? Just because of the spiritual element of these things. How did I get into the Botanica industry? To be honest with you, and I'll even go further back, there's a verse in my sign, and destiny is so incredible because our Odus of Ifa are not what they are because of who we are. We are who we are because of our Odus of Ifa. And ironically, an Odu that speaks of the trafficking of religious items is Irete Suka, which is actually my Odu. And there's a verse of Ifa that states that it is to lose the true idea or concept or essence of Orisha to focus on beads. It is to lose the essence of Orisha to focus on Ajere or the soperas. It is not, or it is to lose the concept of Ifa when we focus on cloths or any of the things that could possibly be sold here. So it's ironic because I'm in this industry and Orumila already predictated this before I even stepped foot on earth. So it's just, you go through these moments where you're like, wow, there's really something around each individual. So having that verse and then realizing that throughout my childhood, I was always in botanicas. You know, when other kids were going to the mall, I was like, I want to check out this Botanica that just opened up. So it's kind of been a focal point, and it was something I was very interested in. And I didn't realize that as a young man, by me entering and just experiencing things, I was really preparing myself for a career in this. You know, when you have faith in Ifa, Orumila and Ela move you in a way where you're always going to be in line with your destiny. You just have to move your feet in the right direction, right?
Wow. Could you could you elaborate on how the traditions, that it's science as well as spirituality, and they both go together?
Oh, thank you for that question. I'll never forget when I initiated myself as a Babalawo, I interacted with my Ojubona for the first time, Abetigo, right? And I'll never forget his words. And it even, it made me, it opened, I tell you, I've been studying Ifa now for years, and I feel like I learned more with this gentleman in a week than, just a gentleman that, 27 years of Ifa, directing Ifas, breathes this. And he told me something. He said, God's son, Ifa is the only thing that moves in harmony with science and music. And I looked at him and I said, I have no idea what you mean, but I think I have an idea. He said, it is a science because when we look at the divination process, it's nothing short of scientific, right? But it moves with music and in melody and in harmony as well, because this is poetry. So Ifa is the only thing in the universe that moves with these two mechanisms in perfect harmony. We're working with binary code, and then we're working with tonal vowels and things like that to invoke. So that's why Ifa is both of these things, right? And ultimately, when you combine science with music, you get spirituality. You look at most mysticisms or spiritualities, you're going to have both of these elements. There's a rhyme, there's a reason, there's a process, but we can't lose the aspect of the art or the spirit, focusing on that which is so, organized, or, that of arithmetic or that process, right? We cannot become rigid. And he said that, it's always moving in harmony. And sometimes when we focus more on the scientific aspect of faith, we can't move because faith moves in a way that is scientifically inexplicable.
Can you talk about, a lot of people, and I used to believe as well, into our research more, thinking that, the Africans that came to Cuba were all Yoruba, and how inaccurate that is. You had Africans that came from the Congo
Oh,
and
yes.
Togo. And
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
can you talk about how the Africans um, developed and give some examples? Like, for example, in Africa, they don't use saperos, right?
Correct.
Or, for example, our ide is yellow and green,
Correct.
and it's like a green brownish color. To even so much so that I've heard that older people in Cuba say that they recall ides being orange and green
Correct.
at one point. Um, I actually have a ide like that that's orange and green, but also with the yellow and green combined.
Nice.
Um, um, can you talk about and it doesn't have to necessarily be those, but that's just to give you an example of how the African was intelligent to conform to their geographical location, their social situation, and maybe perhaps give like a brief history of some important people who played a role in developing the traditions in Cuba. If you could, like, give a female and a male,
Of
like
course,
both.
of course. I'm gonna touch on Ifa first, and then we're gonna go ahead and delve into the feminine aspect of Ifa and its development as well. I've always said that one of the greatest characteristics of African or Afro descendant people, besides the wisdom that we've been blessed with, is the adaptability. You look at us, being, taken from Africa to the Caribbean and Caribbean to the New World or wherever your diasporic origins are. And we've made it work. I mean, to the point where you look across the nations or the world and you have somebody with really present African blood, surviving basically everywhere. And it really is an homage to our ancestors when they first got transported into the New World. And another thing is, I've always felt like the Ifa that is practiced in Cuba is so beautiful because so many lineages were finally forced to get together and really begin to interact and put each of their pieces into the ceremony that, I think has, it's incomparable to me because I recognize how grand and beautiful it is. So what happens sometimes is, we look at the way the Ifa is conducted or our ceremonies are conducted in the New World and how different they are from the Sese practice that's either Ife-centric, Oyo-centric, or even Oshobo-centric, is because they follow one lineage. In Cuba, we have multiple lineages that we got together. And what happened is in ancient Nigeria, a lot of these people really didn't get along. When we're talking about the people in Oyo, and we're talking about Oramiyang and all of the Alafins basically expanding their influence across Yoruba land, not everybody readily interacted with them. They were feared. So how are we going to have a religious dialogue when you're basically conquering my city state and now you want to talk about religion? I don't know how that could have happened. So if we look at the influences that arrived in Cuba, where we have influences from everywhere, Oyo, Shobo, Ife, even Benin as well, which some people would even debate are the spiritual ancestors of the Yoruba people due to the fact that it's really kind of public knowledge that Odudua was a gentleman from Benin, right? So that's the first aspect of it. And some of the original Babalawos that came over, we have Joaquin Cadiz, Ifa Omi Ogunda de Dura, who was one of the first guys and one of the first elders to really bring over Ifa and organize it. You had Adesiona, right? Or Barameji, Nyon Remigio Herrera, another very well-known Babalawo. We had, oh gosh, what was this gentleman's name? He was Ogunda Meji, Norberto Noriega, who was actually really key in installing the Egungun cult in Cuba, and was also a Bocono, who was basically a Babalawo from Benin, right? These were the gentlemen that really started pulling together and really recapturing their faith and making things happen. And these were gentlemen that, you know, for example, Adeshina was one of the royal bata players for the Alafing. So these are people with credibility and real knowledge, right? So that's from the Ifa male aspect. From a female aspect, you know, we had some really great Olorishas in the beginning of the diaspora. You know, people like Ayala Tuang, who was the godmother of Miguel Febles, who was, you know, probably the most celebrated Babalawo in Cuban history. You know, you had Efuche Waricondo, you had Pepa Herrera, who was the daughter of Adeshina. You know, you had really competent Olorishas, and specifically females, who were actually the ones who used to run the room of Orisha before, you know, in Osala Fobeo. It speaks of when gentlemen really started occupying those power roles more. So, you know, we were really blessed with some great, you know, illuminated minds in the beginning. And I think it really came from the fact that the Olorisha, as well as the Babalawo, interacted without ego. We learned from each other. We interacted with each other. So that's why the knowledge was so extensive. And that's why these people were able to reorganize themselves in the new world. To touch on a topic, the one that you mentioned just now about the Ide and the Ileke was actually one that we recently spoke, at least within my religious house, my elders, as well as my godchildren. We kind of found some information that corroborates that the green and yellow bracelet does come from Africa. And where you're going to see it mostly is in Oshobo, because Oshobo is known as the land of Oshun, right? And this is actually identified in the Odu Owonri Meji, or Owanimeyi, right? Which speaks of the green and yellow Ileke and Ide, ultimately. The Ide is in another Odu, but it speaks of the combination as well. And what happened is in Oshobo was where Orumila married Oshun. So when we talk about the Ileke or the Ide of Ifar, the necklace and bracelet, it represents life and death, right? The green represents life, which is the foliage, you know, the fauna, the plants. And ultimately, when you see a palm tree die, it turns yellow, right? Or it turns brown, or so it basically represents that. But that's where the concept comes from with the interchanging beads, as well as in Oshobo, this has always been used. And it's ironic because Oshobo is one of our influences in Cuba. So just because the green and brown one wasn't popularized, I mean, they knew about it 400 or 500 years ago. They just chose to guide themselves by that lineage. It's not to say we didn't know about it or, you know, anything like that. We just chose to utilize another way. The same way in traditional practice, they guide themselves by a different set of odus to be able to practice. So we're all doing the same thing. We're just implementing it a different way.
Would you care to, you know, there's ignorance on both sides of the fence here. I've seen, for example, in groups on Facebook that was predominantly so-called African American. Now, and I'm saying that not all so-called African Americans, but there are some. Just as there are some so-called Latinos, right? And both who suffer the ignorance of a social construct thing called racism, because there's only one race. You'll see both parties say, no, this is mine. You'll hear even from the Cuban community, some Cubans in the traditions that feel that they are superior in these traditions that will badmouth Puerto Ricans, and the Puerto Rican that will badmouth the Cuban, and the African American will badmouth the Latino, to even other Latinos badmouthing even, let's just say, a Central American or a South American, or even some saying, whoa, why is these white people Europeans in the traditions, right? And so from my study, which isn't nowhere I know extensive as yours, but from my study, I have yet to found anything of sound, authentic information stating that these traditions only belong to a particular people of a geographical location?
Because it doesn't exist. You're gonna have a hard time finding it. Because as well, I can corroborate that. I, in 17 years of study, haven't either.
So could you give a Odu that speaks about humanity?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And just to touch on that, I mean, you know, we need to unite as a human race, as a people. We need to love each other. Ifa, we look, even before I delve into your question, when Odudua arrived in Ife, right? He said, "What are we going to call this place?" And you know, when Odudua arrived, a lot of people don't realize how much of an effect he had on these people, because Odudua came with love. And he said, and they said, you know, our king, your majesty, you've been so loving to us, you've done so much for us. We want to call this Ile Ife, which means Ile, house, Ife, of love. So when we first began, you know, by the example that Odudua gave us, and ultimately Orumila and all these Orishas, it was love, right? And that's why Ile Ife till this day is known as the house of love, where when you arrive, they have a salute, and it actually translates into the way we say brother in the Lukumi faith. You're going to hear the word abure, right? Well, the actual word for brother in the Yoruba language is aburo. So I remember when I was sitting with my my Yoruba teacher, I asked her, I said, does this word mean anything to you? And she says, oh, absolutely. That's the salute that people in Ife give to visitors. And I said, well, we have it as brother. She says, I get where that is, because the way you would treat a brother is what this actual salute means. And I said, well, what does it mean? She says, we have enough to share, or we have enough, right? So it speaks of that from the very beginning. To touch on the different, you know, ethnicities that were involved in Ifa way before modern times, you know, Otura Meji and Osa Meji speak of when the white man was initiated into Ifa, or the albinos, right? The Athing, right? And, you know, Obadala himself was an albino, right? Or, you know, you can look at Odus such as Irosowani, that speaks of when Orumila went into the Far East, and people have interpreted that as, you know, him heading to China, or, you know, Fumeji, where Orumila traveled to India and he learned martial arts, you know, things like this. Orumila said, wherever there is logic, wherever there's love, that's where I'll be. And it's like you said at the beginning, you know, Orumila is present in all these places because it's a growth of intellect, it's a growth of humanity, all of these things. But I think an Odu that really touches on this more than anything, or the humane aspect of Ifa, is Baba Yobe, which is the first Odu of Ifa. And what occurred is that, you know, there was a situation where two basically spaces in the universe had to perform a bo, or sacrifice. One of them was the sky, and the other was the earth. The sky performed a bo, the earth did not, because she wasn't humble, right? So what ended up happening is when the sky realized that his wife, the earth, wasn't humble, he started distancing himself from the earth. And basically the atmosphere was identified in Yobe. And as the sky started distancing from the earth, the rays of the sun started burning the earth. And obviously people were suffering from these extreme conditions, and they went to hide under the tree of Araba, right? Which is the ceiba tree in Cuba, but is a very immense tree in Africa that, you know, could span for hundreds of feet. And it really forced everybody to get together and unify under extreme conditions, right? So Yobe says we must unify, we must be together, we must, in times of tribulation and heated situations, we must be together to help each other survive. And Yobe said that, and if you actually look at what Yobe is, it's two lines, it's a oneness, right? It speaks of the unity. So from the very beginning, Ifa said we must unify. And you could even go into an Odu known as Ofumbat Rubom, which speaks of the Tower of Babel and things like that, or a Pataki that's similar to that story, where people started separating themselves and it was utter confusion, which is kind of the period of existence that we're leading today, where, you know, we might not necessarily be understanding each other as we could be, right?
I'm gonna go to the chat.
Yes, sir.
All the questions are from a friend of mine. Her name is Jade.
Oh, that's one.
Yeah, she's she's a Bayesian sister, but she lives in England. Very intelligent sister. So I'm going to start with her questions because she's the only
Awesome.
one. She's the only one that did ask questions.
Awesome.
All right. Let's see. And before I go ahead, for those that's viewing, please subscribe if you haven't. Share this video. If you care to donate, my Cash App is Malik the Cuban. And so her question is, I don't want to ask a stupid question, but is Santeria, no such thing. Is Santeria and Ifa synonymous? And she goes to ask, I seen a cool video from Joey Diaz describing his experience in his religion. You know, the Joey Diaz, the comedian, he be on Joe Rogan. He's from North Jersey. He's Cuban. He's a child of Batala.
I think I have seen the gentleman. I think either my wife or my kids showed me, like, oh my God, this guy's in the religion. Yeah, entertaining guy, man. You know, shout out to him. You know, at least putting the culture out there and giving some awareness, right? Yeah. But as far as your question, I would say yes, because Santeria is nothing more than a child religion of Ifa, right? You're gonna see some differences. Because you're going to see images of Catholic saints. You're going to see some ingredients that are similar to the traditional ones, but they're a little bit different. But the basic gist of what we're doing is the same. You know, it's just a methodology might be a little different, products or tools might be a little different, but synonymous, yes. They're born from, one is born from the other. The same way Candomblé is synonymous with Ifa. The same way voodoo is, synonymous with voodoo from Benin, right? So absolutely.
Her next question is, how does someone who's not initiated get over the hurdle of fear when studying our ancestral traditions? This topic is taboo in a lot of Caribbean households.
Great question as well. The way you get over this fear is by associating yourself with people that aren't going to cause you fear. And that is a difficult search sometimes because, that is a red flag as well. Anybody that is not willing to answer in a respectful, educated fashion to a question, no matter how inquisitive it may be, those are things you have to be careful with because, I could ask a doctor, an unethical question or one that's a little bit invasive and, me not being a medical professional or being trained, I could fall into that. I expect somebody, a professional at least, to be patient and be receptive of my interest, but redirect my question or redirect the goal, right? So you gotta distance yourself from people who aren't willing to nurture, right? When you're coming into this, you're a baby. You're coming into this as somebody blind, someone who does not know. So you need nurturing, competent, professional people to really get you up to speed. So that's the best way to avoid that is by associating yourself with people who aren't going to do those kind of things.
You were speaking about Obatala, and she says, this is why Obatala is associated with white. And then she says, is it because he's albino? So she's asking, is it because he's albino?
Yeah, absolutely. We can say there's some association due to the fact that, put it this way, his frequency of light was so white that it ultimately manifested in his physical form, right? What does the color white make people feel? Calm, peaceful, all of these different things. So that's why he's associated with being either an elderly gentleman or someone who's trying to purify or calm situations down. There's a manifestation of him, and that's you can see when things start changing based on the light once again of Ayaguna, where he was a young man who was pretty aggressive. He was a warrior, and he's associated with a mixture of like white and red. So it's kind of like a Shango Badala energy, right? But pure Badala concept, definitely that's why he's albino. He was so pure that it manifested through his skin.
Is there any more questions from the room? Question I wanted to ask you is,
yes, sir.
Wow, it was literally on the tip of my tongue. I was going to ask you. Let me think. Let me think. Let me think. So she said, "Thank you for answering her question."
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for asking. Absolutely.
We have a question. Obora Oboyi and Ifa, once a woman receive equal fa, are women still do women still have a place in Ifa?
Oh gosh, I think they have the most important place. Once a woman receives ikofa, some people would translate the term ikofa to mean have knowledge of Ifa or to be able to learn about Ifa, right? And that's what the woman is basically able to do once she's initiated. She attains the rank of apetebi, or wife of Orumila, spiritual wife of Orumila, and has the ability within her capacities to begin functioning fully within Ifa, whether it be responsibilities in the Isefa or Plante, or just being able to study her Odu and how to attend to Ifa. Absolutely, she has a place. And then there's another rank, even after that, if she is with a Baalawo as her husband, or possibly even the mother of Baalawo, she can attain the rank of Apetebi Ayafa, which even brings even more responsibilities. The Apetebi Ayafa, the word Ayafa, means wife of Ifa, right? So the Apetebi, who is the wife of Ifa, right? So absolutely. And, there's an Odu known as Ochetura that says you can have 1,000 men in one room, but if there's no women, that room is incomplete. So it speaks of the absolute necessity of the woman within the functions of Ifa. There can be no ceremony within any of these, I would even go traditions, where a woman is not present in some form or metaphysical fashion.
Mm-hmm. Um, oh, we have, I believe he's new to my channel. I've never seen him before.
Awesome.
I want to say thank you, Rob Marshall, for tuning in. And likewise, if you haven't subscribed, please do so and share. He asked the question, do you recommend any books that I can read? Introductory level.
Um, Question I get asked all the time. And I'm not saying that there's not good information that's pressed up in books, but it's very difficult to find a piece of literature that you're going to be able to hands down, blindfold on, believe in. I always say that, when you're doing independent study, always take everything with a grain of salt, right? And the reason I say that is because as a young man, when I didn't have religious elders and I was delving into all these different books, I had to unlearn a lot of things. And at the end of the day, it still serves as information because you know what not to do, you know what to avoid, or, it serves its purpose. But the best advice I can give on that is get initiated, get involved, or at least begin dialoguing with people who may end up being religious elders so they can start guiding you, because the best information someone can learn is the information from their Odu of Ifa, which is revealed in their hand of Ifa, because that is the religion based on your destiny. So you can learn about Shango in general, but the way Shango interacts with you, you'll only know once you have your Odu. So there's Joseph Baba Ifa channel is a great option. Please watch the videos. We have a bunch of good information there. I stand by all of it, right? Malik's channel as well, with this different topics that we're touching on, and what he brings up. These are things we can really touch on and move forward. But ultimately, if you really want thorough Ifa information, you have to get involved with a religious house.
Um, I know. Damn. All right. So this wasn't the question. This is the question I want to ask you, but I'm trying to think of the other question I was going to ask you. You had mentioned earlier. Uh, Oduduwa.
Yeah,
Um, Rob Marshall says understood and thank you.
absolutely.
Um, and I know we've spoken before. You mentioned this. You referred to him as a Messiah. And also I've heard that Arula, Arumila, is a prophet. I've heard that used. Um, would you care to elaborate and explain that?
I think that's pretty much put perfectly, because you know we have to, I think, to be able to really delve into how these men fulfilled those roles the way they're popularly known, we have to kind of detach ourselves from the current concept of a Messiah per se, right? Because when you look at somebody like Jesus, Jesus was both. He was Messiah and prophet, you know. In Ifa, they kind of elected the roles so everybody can fulfill them independently and fully, right? So I would go as far to say, you know, Odudua is the Messiah of Ifa. He was the Messiah of the Yoruba people, right? Culturally, socially, he really took our tribe to another level, right, of existence. Orumila is a very how do I say this? A messianic prophet, I guess you could say, because Orumila as well fulfilled roles of a Messiah that were prophetic as well. Because he, through his knowledge and through even his advice to Odudua once he arrived, because when Odudua arrived, he fulfilled the prophecy because he filled the characteristics that the Ifa divination said that they should look for. But, you know, when he arrived in Yoruba land, he's like, oh my God, I just met you people and now I'm king, right? So Orumila really helped Odudua learn how to fulfill his function. The Babalawos really molded and you know, polished Odudua into this great figure. So they kind of, that's why you hear in Ifa, Odudua and Orumila are two sides of the same coin. They had great affection for each other and they helped each other grow tremendously, you know. But I would say that, I think, just to give, you know, maybe specific roles, Odudua was the Messiah and Orumila was the prophet, simply because he was the one who, apart from manipulating the Ifa oracle perfectly, you know, the Ifa oracle is kind of based on Orula. When we say an Odu like Oyekun Tesia, we're talking about Orumila, right? And that was his name, Oyekun Tesia, and that's who he was. And, you know, when we're talking about literally that manifestation, we're talking about Orumila's multiple lifetimes, you know, and that same Odu or person may have been born as Odudua. He may have been born as Ochung in a lifetime. You know, it can happen because we're all energy and it can be distributed any which way the divine process sees fit.
A friend of mine, who I'm sure he wants to tear my head off, I've been missing his phone call. You call me at the wrong time, bro. I don't know what it is with you. You just call at the wrong times. So don't think I've been avoiding you, brother. Brother Rock Kepler, Boricua brother, very intelligent brother. By the way, he has his channel now. It's called United Front. Also, brother, put in the chat your clothing wear. He has a Kemetic wear. He's very heavily into Kemet.
Okay.
Very knowledgeable Kemet. He's very much into African spirituality, Africa period. He asked the question, he says, I don't know if this was answered. How far back does Ifa go? And the next question is, some people tie it to Kemet.
Okay. So from what I've been able to understand, I'm by no means a formally trained anthropologist, right? But from what I've been able to understand, I've always heard the number tossed around 5,000 years, right? I heard recently an interview from a gentleman that practices Isese. Pretty much that's all he does. He said at least 1,500 to 2,000 years before Christ, right? So I have heard as well, and there have been some hypothesis about, because if I'm not mistaken, Kemet, you know, it has to do with like Egypt and things like that, correct? Yeah. So I have heard some people try to say that, you know, Odudua, you know, came from Egypt, or I believe it was the Nukpe tribe, or things like that. And ultimately, that's where he came running from. These are theories, quite possible. But I'm sure they all interacted. Orumila interacted with everybody. I actually recently, I have a client that we were looking at a verse from her Odu, and the actual verse mentioned something from like Mali Dogon tradition, you know? So I was kind of blown away. The more you study, you begin to realize Orumila was nothing more than a assimilator of really great information. So when we look at Odus such as Oturasa, where it mentions Egypt, the mummification process, all of these different types of wisdoms, I don't doubt it. In different lifetimes, Orumila was everything, the Orishas were everything. So there has to be a connection there. And we really have to work towards seeing what that is, because it just provides us that more stability in our faith, and it unifies us more. And that's where we have to really get to a point where we're all functioning on the same cylinders.
I feel you on that. His clothing wear is comedicwear.com. I highly ask everybody's viewing, check out his, he sells shirts, hoodies, pillows, a whole bunch of stuff. Really good quality. Matter of fact, and I got to do it for the brother. I'm a real big fan of well, as you can see, Darth Vader, the dark side.
Very nice.
But who people refer to, they say Anubis, but in Metanet his name would be Enpu. He's
Okay.
the one. He's the dog. He's like the guy of the underworld. He's like the
Nice.
dog. He has a shirt, man. I want to get that shirt from him. He says there's a lot of correspondences between the two. That's why I asked.
Absolutely.
Next question is, what's the difference? I don't know if they meant, they said, what's the difference from, or maybe they should, what's the difference between, what's the difference from Olofi, Ododomare, and Orula?
Okay, so Olofing, we have a great video that touches on this as well, and even more manifestations of the divine life force, right, which is Olodumare. But Olofing, the word literally means Olo Afing, or Ofing, better said, owner of the law, right? And it basically translates to governor. It is a term that's used to refer to God because, that's kind of what God is. He governs the universe, right? But more formally, that title was actually first given to Odudua. And the Odu Baba Yobe was where Odudua was identified as Olofingaye, right? Or the governor of earth, right? When he arrived, yes, sir, when he arrived in Ife, right? So that's the first way to touch on that term. What was the other one she said? Olorum or Olodumare?
I'm just so happy you spoke about Odudua so much.
Oh, he's the man. He's the man.
Because that's my father, and you don't hear nothing about Odudua, man.
Oh, man. Everything is because of him.
Ododomare and Orula.
Absolutely. So Olodumare, another contracted word as well, compound word. Olo means owner, Odu means time, and Mare means that have not manifested or revealed themselves. So Olodumare is basically he who is the owner of time's infinite, right? So he's someone that is everlasting. And to be divine, that's a characteristic that they like, the eternity of things. So it's just another term for God. And to me, it's the base term, right? That is really the word for God, at least to me within Ifa, right? And then Orula, when we look at the word Orula, it's a shorter version of the word Orumila, right? So I've interacted with a couple different people to get some good translations. So it's really Orum mi Ela, right? Which means in heaven is Ela. Ela is the prehistoric energy that really birthed Orula. Or Orumi Ela can also mean in heaven is my destiny, making reference to Orumila as the revealer of destinies, right? And then Orunla could mean, my destiny reveals itself in heaven, or my destiny is in heaven, or heaven reveals itself or presents itself, or my destiny is large. The Yoruba language, it really, one word, one letter, one accent mark could really take you on a completely different sentence. So those are the ones I've been able to identify. And it really touches on Orumila as Eleri Ping, right? The witness to creation, or the witness to destiny. And that's why he's the one who reveals it. And that's why he is the first step in this faith, because he's the one who reminds us of what we're meant to do down here. Until then, we're just as aimless as we were in the house of Ayala when we didn't have a head.
Did I go forget what I was going to ask you? The person said thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Oh, Do you speak or write or read Yoruba or Lukumi?
Absolutely. I've been studying the Yoruba language now for about 2 to 3 years formally. We're actually going to be starting Yoruba classes here at the Botanica, so I'll definitely let you guys know that. So my same teacher can also teach everybody Yoruba. Am I fluent? By no means. I wish I had more time to dedicate to the study as I'd like. But it's definitely something that I know a certain have a certain level of vocabulary within it where I can kind of look at a phrase and kind of break it down to where it's understandable. Because sometimes in the Fa verses, even though they're translated in Spanish, some words are left untranslated, and those are the ones you really have to delve into because usually that's where the moral of the Pataki is. But Lukumi, if we really look at that term, Lukumi is it's been translated one of two ways, at least to me. One of them I've heard as a salute between friends, where you're basically saying "olukumi" or "hello, my friend," or "you are my friend," right? But there's another term that is a little more grim, where "olukumi" means "olu" or "lu" as such, or "lu" means to hit, right? "Ku" means death, and "me" means I or the person, right? So there's people who say that what the slave owners would do is they would listen to words that the slaves would tell each other to kind of identify a group, because they weren't educated in the ethnic groups of Africa. So what would happen is unfortunately it's a little bit gruesome when they would begin to hurt the Yoruba, or raise the whip, or however the method of torture unfortunately was at that time. The Yoruba people would scream "lukumi," which means the way you're hitting me is going to kill me, right? So they said, well, those are the Lukumi, right? So it's a little bit of a grim reminder of we were persecuted, right? So, and that happened with the other tribes as well. The Mandingas, the Karawalis. That was another term that was given to like the Awakwa tribe from Cameroon. The Congos, they would hear the word Congo a lot. So a lot of people associate the form of Mayombe that's practiced in the New World as being from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, when it's actually from Angola, right? And Ngala and all these different places. I actually met a Congo gentleman that really broke it down for me really lovely the other day. And you just begin to realize that they're just reminders of what we've been through.
Next question is, where do our ancestors go once they transition from this life?
It depends. It depends on their levels of elevation, right? Unfortunately, I lost my grandmother back in December, and it's a question I really had to analyze, right? By various spiritists that I've been around, and some of them will say, "Hey, I really don't see this spirit manifesting themselves." It can mean one of two things: either they're going through their spiritual elevation process in another part of the universe, or they've reincarnated already to be able to start working through that process. So what are our ancestors doing? Either they're around us helping us progress, either they're somewhere in the universe elevating with the higher power, or they've reincarnated, right? Possibly as one of our family members or even our children. So these are one of the different paths that you can take, once you unfortunately transition. But they're always around. Another place they actually eradicate as well is going to be the Sang Egungun icon, which is also the teja, right, or the tile that's used in the Egun cult and traditional and Afro-Cuban practice. We call them, right? They're functioning. They're a part of the universe once again, ideally. So we have to, when we want to interact with them, we call them, whether it be through a spiritual mass, whether it be through an Egungun ceremony. That's how we really manifest them afterwards. But they're always around. Just based on the word Egun means bone, right, or Egungun, right? So when we're talking about that and we're saying, oh, the Egun or the spirit of my ancestor, they're within us because we share the same DNA. They're in our bones, right? So that's where that concept comes from.
Ooh. Next question is, it's a two-part question. Is the Yoruba class going to be virtual? And does your Botanica have a website to order?
So first question is, yes, we are going to have the virtual capabilities for people that are at a distance that want to learn. So definitely, and we'll provide all that information once we get, get ready to release it. And yes, botanicacandlesandmore.com is up and running. And you can also order through Facebook, or you can reach out to us through any of the social media outlets, Botanica Candles and More, or just Joseph Babaifa. Definitely.
Okay. And Jay said, thank you, answering her question in regards to the afterlife.
Thank you for asking.
Question I have for you is, can you explain, when one says Egun and then someone may say Morto?
Egun is a Yoruba word. It means spirit. Muerto is a Spanish word that means spirit. Usually when we're saying Egun, we're referring to more formal Ifa practice, but I've been in spiritual masses where, the head of Piritita will be like, this Egun, and we all know they're referring to a spirit. But an Egun is somebody that has transitioned, and a Muerto obviously is as well. So synonymous as well, just a different language. But usually we're referring to, different moments of practice. Egun is going to be more formal, and then, Muerto is probably going to be more in the misa.
Would you say Egun is biological and Morto is deceased people in general?
Okay. Yeah, there's this big thing now where a lot of people like to separate our ancestors. Like the Bóveda is for people who are your ancestors of blood, and then Egun is more spiritual ancestors. They're all together all the time. So when we're attending Egun, the first ones we're really attending are our blood ancestors, because the word Egun means bone, right? So it's people that share that DNA with us. But people from our Ifa lineage, our spirits, guides, everybody's there when we're attending them, just like at the Bóveda as well, or the spiritual white table mass, right? They're all together. Now, what and what me and my wife have come to a conclusion with in her spiritual practice is she likes to tell her godchildren, with the Bóveda, try to keep things as clean as possible, right? Let's avoid anything that can remind that spirit of the material world. And then, food offerings and things that are a little more rustic, like blood and things like that, that's going to go at the teja or the tile or the Isang Egungun icon, because it's more rustic. Because in Africa, what happens is, when you want to feed Egun, you literally go out to your backyard because everybody's buried back there, and you sacrifice to your ancestors. In the New World, we don't have that luxury, and you have to be careful because you can get in some legal trouble for trying to do that.
Mm-hmm. Any more questions? If not, I'm going to hit you my last question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Last question is.
Oh man.
Would you care to recite in Urdu, in Yoruba, that is beneficial for the listeners, beneficial for everybody?
Absolutely. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and recite a verse from my personal Urdu to help people guide their destinies or their head towards prosperity, right? This is a verse to Ori in Irete Otura. Forgive me. Irete Otun Kibori, Irete Otun, Toba Ba Osifa, Ojonaniko Sheadifa Fun Ori. Ori hun lo resha ofun oba eboni woni koshe osi bebo umbelo rubo nje otitaloye ori ni sunidoye afin ring obaje. Show. And basically what that verse is saying, that Irete Otum, Irete always goes to the right, or does the right thing, or preserves his honor. We pray to Ori to constantly put us in a mental state to be able to do this. And because of this, Ori will direct us to the presence of kings so that we can guide them as well and help all of us move towards a better future.
Ashe. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
So is there any more questions from the room before I close out? I'll give it like 2-3 minutes because
Yeah, of
like when
course, of course. Give them absolutely no rush,
yeah.
no rush, no rush.
Wow. And I didn't it's interesting because so when an Odu is recited, the Odu should be sang.
Well, Ifa is okay. So yes and no. You're gonna notice in the traditional Ebo, known as the Ebo Riru, it's not that they're necessarily singing as much as Yoruba is such a tonal, melodic language. Even them just talking it sounds like they're singing. But there are certain parts of the verse that should be sung, and those are known as iere. And in the Afro-Cuban Lukumi language, they're going to be called suyeres, right? So me personally, I like to go back and forth, right? It depends on how I'm feeling. But I try to sing as much as possible because I feel like you're harmonizing. If we're talking that Ifa is the only thing that moves in harmony with science and music, there has to be a musical aspect to it. And it's I think I have a predisposition towards it because in my Odu of Idete Suka was where the albino peacock sang to Obadala, and Obadala listened to his song more than the other birds because the peacock put more effort into his song. And that's why Irete Suka, with his song and with his poetry, was able to bring the Orishas down from heaven because he wanted to see them. He wanted them to manifest. He had a real interest that they manifest. And that's why he would sing. It was his way of paying homage. So you're going to see people that are more, Adura-centric or more prayer-centric, where it's more of like a transit type thing. And then you have people such as myself who like to utilize as many, harmonious things as possible, or melodic things as possible. And coming from a musical household, and just being Latin as well, I mean, it's not long before we start dancing or singing, right? When we're all together.
It's interesting because when you explain that, it's the same thing, when I used to be Muslim or even now, as someone who's not Muslim, and I'll hear somebody say, "Oh, I love how they sing when they speak the Quran." I'm like, this it's not singing. It's truthfully not. It's not singing at all. So that's kind of
It's
interesting how they,
invocation. It's
yeah.
poetry. And when we look at I have a friend of mine. He's a Muslim, and every now and again I go to the mosque because I sit, I partake. I'm a huge fan of it. And there's great knowledge there at the Juma and stuff like that. And I've always been a fan of it. Life and Orumila took me on a different path, but you see so much in common with the old world faiths, and it's a beautiful thing. And I recommend that for every practitioner of Ifa and Orisha. Even though it is your base practice, please be open-minded and please experiment other faiths. Even if you're not practicing them, like just listen and see what's going on. And you're going to see that there's so much in common with all of us. And Orumila experimented all the faiths. And that's why Ifa is so rich, because we assimilated so many beautiful things in one corpus.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess there's no more questions. So I'm just gonna ask you, how could everybody here contact you?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, Malik, thank you so much for the opportunity. Definitely a fan. All of us are over here of your channel and whatnot. Please, everybody, be reminded to subscribe to Malik's channel first and foremost, and then Joseph Baba Ifa. It's a real pleasure. How can you contact Joseph Baba Ifa, right? The best way to get in contact with me is by contacting Botanica Candles and More, Incorporated here in Orlando, Florida. We're located at 4955 South Orange Avenue. Phone number 407-440-2086. And definitely that's the quickest way to get in contact with me. But we're also present on all the social medias, whether it be Instagram, at Botanica Candles and More Official, or IG, as far as like at Joseph Baba Ifa, YouTube. We're definitely present. I'm somebody that is very present, even within my business and definitely within my religious home. And you could ask Malik. I'm not hard to get in contact with.
um, do you have any closing remarks?
Thank you. Not only to you, Malik, but just to your public. And, you know, we here at Botanica Candles and More, we're all about the unity and the growth and the progress. And my goal as a spiritual professional, as a Babalawo, is to simply help people fulfill their destiny, you know. And anytime I can do that, anytime I can relay some information, impart pieces of advice that could help people get to the place I'm in or the place that we're trying to get to together, that's what I'm all about. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and love Ifa, but even before then, love each other. And I would say that.
Thank you so much, Ashe. Um, so to those that's still watching, I just want to close out, and I want to say to you all that I hope that you, if you're somebody that disbelieves in these traditions or dislikes or hates, I hope that you have kind of a different perspective and understanding of these traditions to that which perhaps you were indoctrinated into thinking, or or just on your own accord, um, just being ignorant. And I don't say that to be insulting. Um, we all suffer from some type of ignorance when we don't know something. And also, I want to say to those that's listening, watching, that in these traditions, we don't proselytize. We don't knock at your door. We don't stand on corners screaming. We don't, walk around trying to convert people. We don't. It doesn't operate like that. And so, the point of this video really, in no shape, form, or fashion, was it to say to the public, come to Ifa. It was just to inform you. That's if you're gonna come to Ifa, that's what it was meant to be. But it's just to inform the public, and just to have a different understanding to something you didn't know. And I hope that anything that was beneficial that you take, and you contemplate on it, but most importantly, you make application of it, and that you can share with others. And anything that was stated that was incorrect by myself or by Joseph, anything that we've stated is incorrect, I ask that you forgive us. I say that we are not above being critiqued, corrected. And so with that, I leave out, and peace to Robert Rodriguez. Is that one? That's peace. Um, so I leave out and I say Black Power, Palante, power all to the people, and Oboro Boshi She.
Number love for you, Malik. Until next time.
All right, thank you.
Take care.